Alright, so we're back. And today I wanted to just do some like generic spotlight video for NU because eh, again, recording lives is fun, but I do want to try and do more with the tier than I currently do, and I think this would be something that's pretty fun. And so a better way would there be to kind of kickstart some of these kinds of videos that we're looking over what some people do consider at the moment to be the best Pokemon tier, Toxicroak. And the Toxicroak is an incredibly potent wall breaker in the tier. It's got like pretty much the best coverage you could ask for on such a Pokemon. It's got a dual stab combination that is a very targeted pool of defensive switch-ins based on what it's resisted by, so, you know, you're looking at ghost and poison types. And it's got the coverage that it needs to be able to actually successfully break past those, right? You've got pretty much ghost or dark, depending on how you want to care about resist berries. So you're able to hit those poison and ghost type switch-ins neutrally or super effectively, depending on, you know, if it's a poison or ghost type. And in general, Toxicroak is just really hard to play into as a result. Dedicated switch-ins to it are very rare, because most of the Pokemon that, you know, so you're looking at poison types pretty much is the safer switch-in. They're the ones that can't get hit super effectively. But for the most part, the poison types don't have good recovery. You know, if you're looking at, say, Garbodor and Weezing, the most you're going to get out of recovery is a potential Black Sludge held item, or maybe Pain Split. And that's not the most consistent means of actually staying healthy throughout a game. And if you look at something like, say, Silvally Poison, you know, that's bulkier, I think, overall than the other two. But it has no recovery of any kind, so the only way you're going to be keeping it healthy is if you pair it with potential Wish support from Clefairy. This makes Toxicroak really difficult to actually deal with. And so if we're looking at these kinds of sets, alright, what do you typically see? Well, I think the most notorious set is probably just going to be your Nasty Plot Toxicroak, right? I think this is the set that most people will see on the ladder, because it's a setup set. I think people in general just do prefer setup Pokemon because they're a lot more fun. And this is going to be the typical configuration. You can drop Focus Blast for Vacuum Wave as well. You can even drop Shadow Ball for Vacuum Wave and have just dual stab coverage. I think either option is very good. It does leave you... Now, I mentioned this in one of my videos recently. I believe it was in one of the Flora Sky Let's Play videos. You should watch that. It is a great series. But I remember we had a Facebook spotlight go up for Toxicroak somewhat recently, and there are commenters unironically complaining about the set because they're saying it can be walled by Ghastly with this configuration. And I have never seen a more, like... I'm trying to think of the appropriate word to use here, because I don't want to be too rude to some people that are just simply not as adept with competitive Pokemon, because there are more casual fans. But when you're trying to argue about whether a set's good or not, we want to look at it through the lens of what's actually viable in the tier, right? And I think people do forget too, Ghastly's bulk, it's not good. That is 30-35. I do not think this is taking Sludge Bomb from Toxicroak. But you also have to keep in mind the following too, right? What ghost types are prevalent in NU? So like, let's look at ghosts as a whole, because I think that's mostly what they were talking about. Cofagrigus, yeah, it can switch into this kind of variant of Croak, fine, but if Croak Nasty Plots up, Sludge Bomb does do a lot. And you also have that poison chance, which further exacerbates Toxicroak's ability to actually pressure Cofagrigus. You also need to keep in mind that Cofagrigus' recovery is generally going to be limited to leftovers. Maybe it runs rest, but that also just further makes it a lot easier to whittle away at with repeated Sludge Bombs, potentially getting a poison, forcing to switch into hazards, etc. Because you don't have to set up, obviously, with Croak immediately. You can just try to fire off Sludge Bombs on your switch-ins at first to get them weakened. You know, if you look at, say, Cursal, that's not very relevant right now. We just had a VR vote, and it ended up dropping to, like, C rank. It's really not very good. You know, Decidueye, that's hit neutrally by Sludge Bomb. Frostlass, it's not very bulky, so Sludge Bomb is pretty punishing for it to switch into. Golurk, I'll give you that one. Quad resisting, Sludge Bomb, immune to these two moves. This variant, yeah, Golurk beats pretty handily. Gorg's small, it's very fragile on the special side, and of course, neutral Sludge Bomb. Like, the main point that we're getting at here is that most switch-ins that are Ghost type still don't take Sludge Bomb very well, and the chance of poison just makes that an even more tall task for them. And if you look at poison types, well, it's mostly just an issue of a lot of them don't have a great way of dealing with Croak. You know, if Croak Nasty Plots as they switch in, especially all the time, they just get broken by Focus Blast. Yeah, you can have, like, Psychic Fangs Poison Valley, you can have Psybeam Wheezing if you're a true, you know, gangster. You're gonna have, like, Stomping Tantrum Garbodor. But Toxicroak still is really good at putting pressure on these Pokemon. But what if I told you there was a way to circumvent that issue entirely? Let me show you. So, I said that's been popping up a lot more, and the item can go Life Orb or Choice Specs here. We've seen a little bit of both. I'm putting Life Orb here because I think that's common, or more common. We've actually seen, not Facade, but we've seen a lot more of just not three attacks. We've seen a lot more 4 attacks, just all-out attacker Toxicroak. Because what this set does is it bypasses the issue of having to maybe be walled by something or missing out on that priority, and just overall becoming super threatening versus every potential switch in. Yes, you do lack the ability to overwhelm certain checks as quickly, but I think this set's really deadly because you still eventually are going to overwhelm a lot of your checks just by virtue of most of them not having good recovery. This makes it so ghost types are a lot more consistently dealt with in my eyes, because you don't have to ever worry about, you know, what your total moveset is. You just know for sure you're running Shadow Ball. And while the threats that you're not going to be able to break past as easily would be like Sylph Poison, Garbodor, Wheezing, they're probably something I'm forgetting about. I think there's probably a generic special wall that is a little more difficult to overwhelm, something like Malamar could be. You're just consistent. I feel like it just has more consistent matchups if you go with this set. And again, if you're on like choice specs, that gives you that even greater immediate boost of damage, and also makes you have a little bit better of longevity. I think one of the reasons Toxicroak was really good, despite, like, outside of being so difficult to wall, is that it can switch into Wheezing really easily if you're not running into Psybeam sets, and those aren't very common. It's mostly just a random tech that you can do, because, you know, Wheezing's last move slot's pretty flexible. But Specs just means that you switch into it even more consistently because you don't have to worry about Life Orb recoil. It's just a matter of making this thing's longevity even more of a pain. You could probably even go Black Sludge, but I do think you want to have the extra power. I believe in like April and March of NU, back when that was in like Alpha, and the all-out attacking sets were physical, we saw some Black Sludge on Croak and it was pretty good. Yeah, these sets are just really nice because they compress everything that you want into one. Yeah, you can't set up, but you get every move that you want that you may consider dropping. You get your Focus Blast so that you can for sure, you know, break random Sandaconda, which, not gonna lie, that mon is not as common anymore. But if you want to look at a more common Pokemon, I believe Focus Blast is necessary to reliably break Piloswine. You get Shadow Ball for your Ghost types, and of course you have Vacuum Wave even, so that you can actually threaten or revenge kill faster Pokemon, like, say, Liepard, like Silvally Dark. I'm sure there's another, but I can't think of one. And now, let's talk about the last set. Maybe if you saw what I was typing, you'll know what it is, but we're going to be looking at Choice Scarf Toxicroak, which is a bit of an interesting set. This is pretty much the only way you see physical Toxicroak run at this point, because it's so punishing to run physical variants, I feel, because they are dead weight in a lot of matchups. With Wheezing dropping, it's a lot easier to slot on a Pokemon now that just doesn't care about Toxicroak. You know, now you're not only dealing with like Kofa and Sandaconda, but you're adding that other option. into the mix as well, and you still do have other Pokemon around as well that are just not as easy to overwhelm. I think Toxicroak is particularly reliant on prediction with this set, because again, you are locking into a move, but it's not a boosting item that you've got. You're not, at least choice specs. Gong Shot also can miss. Cross Chop can miss. Earthquake has just straight up immunities. Knockoff, that's a good move, but they're knockoff absorbers. I think it's, a very reasonable thing to do when playing against Choice Scarf Toxicroak. You can pivot in your Silvally versus it. Like, this set's just so much easier to play around, so why is it good? Well, the Choice Scarf boost means that Toxicroak is now actually threatening to a lot more Pokemon than it previously would be. You can actually revenge kill stuff like Gorg Small, the Rotom forms, Liepard, Silvally. If it's not like Flame Charge, you do actually get to outspeed that, which is cool. And so it makes this Pokemon a lot more utility based, I would say. I don't think Scarfcroak's particularly good at threatening teams offensively. And again, that does come down to it mostly being just walled by so much. Because Cross Chop and Gong Shot, again, there are a lot of Pokemon that do switch into those, and then Knock and Earthquake aren't particularly strong without the stab boost. But it just sits at such a nice speed tier that it's pretty easy to get a lot of run out of this Pokemon. Now, if you're looking at Pokemon that you want to pair with Toxicroak, I would say both sets honestly have... I'm going to say both sets because for all intents and purposes, it's like Special Toxicroak versus Physical Toxicroak. You don't really see Sword Stance Croak anymore, but it's like aggressively viable, if that makes sense. It's not something you can't run and have success with. It's just a lot harder to nowadays. For just simplifying things, Physical and Special Croak do have generally the same teammates that you want to look at because they're walled by more or less the same Pokemon. So one of the best teammates I think for Croak in general is Decidueye. Toxicroak's really good at drawing in Pokemon that Decidueye can just absolutely take out. Well, Decidueye... Wow, that was an interesting way of trying to say Decidueye. But Decidueye is also good at drawing in Pokemon that Croak beats. I think Specs Decidueye pairs particularly well with Croak because it can U-turn into Croak versus those like Miltanks that commonly want to switch into it. And even like Skuntank, Croak can come into that pretty easily as well. I guess if you run into a single, like the one Bouffalant that's running on the ladder, Croak's also a good way of dealing with that. Like, I think even physical Decidueye sets like Choice Scarf pair really well with Toxicroak, these like wall breaking sets, because they're so good at breaking into the bulky poison types that Scarf Decidueye just has no business dealing with. Smon also threatens Lowland Persian, which is really good for Choice Scarf Decidueye. While Choice Scarf Toxicroak sets really like those more wall-breaking, disoriented Decidueye sets, be it Choice Specs or even just Nasty Plot Decid, which admittedly isn't the most common anymore, but it's still pretty decent. As Choice Specs Decidueye is really good at applying pressure to stuff like, say, Garbodor, like Kofa. It's good at trying to remove that. And it can still pivot into Toxicroak versus those normal types, and Croak can, of course, threaten him with a Cross Chop. Also, I guess I could mention that you can run Drain Punch on this set. Admittedly, it's... I don't know, I think Drain Punch might even be more common. I prefer Cross Chop, despite the shaky accuracy. I like being able to guarantee Oko Savali Dark, while Drain Punch, I believe, caps out at like 80-something%, maybe it's low 90s. But yeah, you don't guarantee an Oko versus that. I just don't have time for that. I really don't. And for what it's worth, because of how prominent Special Toxicroak is right now, you do get a little bit more run in some games, I think, out of Choice Scarf Croak, because your opponent's going to generally play around the fact that you're special. I still wouldn't say run Sword Stance as a result, because I think teams are just going to be so prepared for physical Croak. But it at least means that Choice Scarf Croak has a few better matchups than it would otherwise. I think the main reason as well that Choice Scarf Croak is viable but like Sword Stance Croak isn't is because with Scarf Croak you're not really relying it on breaking holes in the opposing team, you're more relying it on just revenge killing and crippling checks with knockoff. But with Physical Croak, you are trying to break things. You know, you're trying to take advantage of Pokemon like, say, Alchemy, like Abomasnow, that you can force out and set up against. But there's so many Pokemon that just switch into Toxicroak as you set up. And, like, what are you doing if a Sandaconda switches into you? You're not Oko, and I can tell you that much. What are you doing if a Weezing comes into you? Best case scenario is it burns you with Will-O-Wisp, and then you just have a useless Croak. You know, like, you can't break Weezing, you can't really break Kofa, you can't break Sandaconda. There's just so many of these physically defensive Pokemon that are very common and that Toxicroak struggles with really mightily. And so at least with Scarfcroak, you do have the utility for revenge killing and spamming knockoff. And I mean, even fishing for Gunk Shot poisoning, while I think you could still run like an all-out attacking Physical Croak set with Sucker Punch. You know, it'd be like pretty much the same moveset, but like Drain Punch for sure here, and then Sucker Punch over Earthquake. But at the end of the day, the goals are still different, right? All-out attacking Physical Croak sets that aren't Choice Scarf are looking to break. And it's nigh impossible, I think, to reliably wall break with such sets. I think that about covers it, though. Croak is definitely the best breaker in the metagame right now. I would slot it above Decidueye, because I think Decidueye's speed at least holds it back, and its lack of, like, priority on those, you know, scary wall-breaking sets. And I think that Decidueye has at least, like, some very defined counters. Alright, okay, so I say some very defined counters. I'll say just checks as well. I think Croak's checks, at least in the team builder, are a bit less defined, because you can at least rationalize when you're using Croak, or when you're trying to figure out how to play into Croak. You can go, well, it could, you know, predict my switches. It could set up and then break through my, you know, Weezing or Garbodor. I think a lot of prepping for Toxicroak comes down to, like, when you're actually in the battle, or even just thinking about how you would play versus it in the battle. It's not really a Pokemon that you can build a super competent defensive core against, because it has the tools to dismantle those. You know, it's a very punishing Pokemon, and because it's not very slow and has really good defensive utility as well, it does get a few more opportunities, I think, to wall break than people would like for it to have. I think it's pretty clear why people do consider it as potentially ban-worthy. So anyhow, guys, I hope this video was helpful in showing y'all why Toxicroak is as good as it is, and why, despite being walled by Ghastly potentially, special attacking sets are really good. Yes, Toxicroak may only have 86 special attack and 106 physical attack. What you gotta do is contextualize that within the tier, right? It doesn't matter if its physical attack is a lot higher if it can't make that great of use of it. It still has Nasty Plot to boost this, and 86 in this tier, where a lot of the switch-ins to poison and fighting types struggle with special bulk, ends up being passable, and the coverage of course helps with that too. But yeah, guys, that's it from me. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.